know what you're about to listen to? The Coolville Urbanism Podcast. I'm your host, Michael colville-andersen. Beirut is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world, with at least 5,000 years of history under its belt. This is part 2 of my interview with Habib Battah, intrepid, all-round investigative journalist, and, in many ways, the independent international voice of Beirut and Lebanon. In part 1, we discussed Beirut Inc., how a once great city is now a playground for the oligarchy, developers, and starchitects, and the many reasons why that is a horrible idea. In this part, we'll zoom in. Habib is well-versed in many topics regarding his city, but he seems to have one particular area of interest. In a city with such an epic history, if you poke a stick in the ground, you'll probably hit something of archaeological and historical interest. Compared to other cities in the region, however, very little of Beirut's archaeological legacy has been explored and documented. For obvious reasons, little work was done during the Civil War between 1975 and 1990. Since then, the focus has been on intense development, which is what part 1 is all about. I'm going to talk to Habib about his work in creating awareness about the shocking lack of respect for history and archaeological ruins in Beirut, and how developers, the authorities, and even starchitects are given free rein to erase history as they construct yet another glass and steel apartment building for the rich. In my network, I often get tips sent to me. They're things like, look at this stupid bike lane in my city that they just put in, or this politician in this country is secretly pushing for a mandatory bike helmet law. Habib gets tips from his network too, but I think they sound a lot more interesting.
Yeah, my tips are like, oh my God, if we don't save this, there's going to be, this place will be erased forever, and there's no memory or history of it. So you find yourself constantly running around town sometimes. There's one emergency after another, one space is being destroyed, or heritage building is being destroyed, or ruins were discovered, left, right, and center. There are all these multiple cranes and construction projects happening all the time. There's such a rush to build. And I just passed by on my way here to speak to you. I passed by a site where there's a building now, but was a Roman water reservoir and process, a Roman water plant. It's interesting. It's infrastructure. But it's not like a beautiful temple, but it's also very interesting. But, I photographed that. There was a cave structure there, and it's gone today, and there's a tower next to it. But the plot in front of it, which is a parking lot, they're just excavating it now. And I just was able to look as I was driving, having something else to do. You get caught up and you want to pull over every 5 minutes in Beirut because there's something going on. You want to take a picture. And so now I made a note that I'm going to go back later today and go see if they've dug up any ruins there. But the problem is that that's a very secure area, a lot of army there. So I'm not sure if I can even go. And so my mind started racing and worrying already about being stopped and harassed.
It's hardly news that there are developers who run rampant everywhere, or politicians who engage in shadowy business, or that there are architects with little respect for urban design or understanding about public space around their shiny new structures. What is news here in Beirut is that this trifecta of urban debauchery has been in play every single day for years. How did this happen?
So when they decided to create a new city in Beirut, they ended up digging up a lot of the past. You're building these towers, you've got to go down deep and create all these holes. So Beirut became at one point the world's biggest archaeological excavation. During the 90s, after the war ended, when this company Solidar was getting started, they started to discover all these ruins. And Beirut has this rich history that's not very well documented of being one of the most important cities in the Roman Empire. And before that, being a prehistoric settlement and, in the Phoenician times, playing a role as one of the earliest places where there were ports. And ship trade began on this coast of ours. So they find a lot of these ruins, and then there's this idea that okay, let's preserve a little bit of it, but it can't stop the progress. So there was the idea that The excavations can't stop the progress of the construction project. And that's a really strange scenario, because that means that archaeologists will be rushing around to pick up artifacts, not having time to study them properly, while bulldozers are plowing around them. And so it's a race against bulldozers. And that's not really the kind of way you do archaeology. You need time to do archaeology. You need to look, compare your notes. Say, I found this here, looks kind of like what we found over there. Maybe there's some connection here. But there's no time for that when you're running around trying to grab, pots and shards and columns and relics of the past, structures, and throw them in the back of a truck. So, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but in some cases it did feel that way, because digs were rushed. And today, we have piles of ruins around the city that we don't know what sites they belong to. We've got about 500 columns sitting in a garden in Beirut that we don't know if they belong to the famous Roman law school of Beirut, one of the most important law schools, one of the world's first law schools that actually helped create the law that's being used around the world today, was actually born here in this city of chaos. It's very ironic. It was a great city, the Roman city of Beirut. It was a metropolis. It was described as a splendid metropolis. It had, chariot racetrack where there was 1,500 gladiators that fought in one day. You had a great Roman theater. It had probably better infrastructure than today, sidewalks and
aqueducts,
and this really important law school. It was a city of law, a city of law students, a city of law professors. And it had so much history, and so uncovering that history could be a fascinating way to reconnect with your fellow citizens, try to come together over preserving our shared history of what happened in this place. But instead, the archaeology was treated kind of as an asset to real estate. Okay, we can get a few columns and pieces here, and we'll help decorate, landscape our projects. But ruins and columns are not landscape props.
Yeah.
These things need to be displayed in museums. They need to be understood where they were found. And so during these excavations of these all across Beirut, there were over 120 excavations just in the 1990s alone. And then in the 2000s and the past 2 decades, basically, there have been probably at least 100 more excavations. So we're talking about over 200 excavations in the city and the surrounding areas. And today, only about 6 sites remain in situ in Beirut. So how do we go from 200 or 300 sites and excavations to only 5 or 6 that remain today? And those that remain today, as we saw during our tour, are often covered with weeds or garbage. There's barely a sign. They just put up signs after 25 years in some places, but most places don't have signs still. And there's no public access to these sites. So, the public basically forgot. They're overgrown with weeds, there's no effort really to say, hey, let's create some kind of exhibition here. Let's show people what their history is about. Let's communicate that to the public. There's very little communication to the public. And so what happens is archaeology becomes thought of as just rocks, just pits of rocks that doesn't mean anything. And so when you find them, why would you even save them? So the end of the war really privatized archaeology as well. Instead of there being a Ministry of Culture with power to defend the country's heritage, to stop some of these projects, the Ministry of Culture became like a privatized entity where they were following what the developer rules were put into place. That we need to rush, we need to hurry these digs. We can't spend too much time on them. We need to build these towers. And so the war actually gutted public institutions that became replaced by these private entities and these businessmen who became running the country, who became the rulers. So businesses replaced the state, and that has really long-term consequences on your ability to create a state.
Now, we saw, walking around the city, you were showing me building sites, and they are, most building sites are blocked off for safety reasons and whatnot. But man, they're taller, the walls here, more surveilled as well. Lots of cameras. So you've been known to stick your phone through holes in the walls and or climb up into buildings and shoot down into it and say, wait, that's like a Roman gate. That might have been, you were telling me, might have been the gate of the city back in the day. And then you're a real thorn in the side of these people, right?
Yeah.
Tell me about the Mr. Over Budget himself. Jean Nouvel was going to build something here, and then you climbed up and took some photos from an aerial position and went, wait, what?
Yeah, I mean, so my reaction to all this is I want to try to document as much history as I can before they destroy it, and give the public some idea of what's going on. Because as you said, when you do these big projects, they create these big construction walls around them, and you can't see what they're finding down there. There's no transparency. They never really publish. Most of the time, they don't publish what they find, or they haven't yet, and it's been years and years. So I thought, let me at least create some evidence for people that there were important ruins here. So maybe someday, at least we can say, well, maybe that fills in some gap in our knowledge, or maybe we can go back and ask, what happened to those ruins? You know, what happened there? If you don't have any, I noticed that if you don't have any images of these projects, of these ruins, then it's almost like they don't exist. So you can never hold people accountable for them. So Jean Nouvel, one of the famous French architects, like so many famous architects in Beirut, unveiled plans for this beautiful tower, you know, if you want to call it beautiful, I don't know, but definitely very modernist, large structure with all glass and steel, mall, and a 5-star hotel, and luxury condos, you know, like we need more of that in Beirut. We already have about 5,000 empty apartments in Beirut because people can't afford these luxury, but they keep building them. You have to wonder why. This Jean Nouvel project, I had heard actually was on a very important archaeological site. And so I tried to get pictures. I tried to slip my camera into little gaps in the construction wall. Sometimes they have little gaps in the wall where you can kind of take a peek at your history. Steal a glance of history. That's what you have to do in Beirut. You have to steal a glance at your history. Or steal a picture. Because the Ministry of Culture has claimed that we should not photograph any archaeological sites under excavation in Lebanon, and that this will hurt the archaeology if we take a picture from afar.
Record it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
which is very strange, and it makes you wonder why they're trying to keep all this secret.
Yeah.
They even claim that, oh, you'll steal the research, as if like some aerial photo of a site is getting like a rock sample from it, you know. I mean, as if you're going to publish an article in an academic journal based on one photo you stole through a crack in a wall.
And like other archaeologists would be irritated that you uncovered some history.
No, I mean, most archaeologists you speak to think this is a completely ridiculous excuse, and that all over the world you can photograph archaeological sites as long as you're not going in there and stealing artifacts or something. Yeah. So we're trying to do that. So back to the Jean Nouvel project, I decided to try to get a peek at it. I tried to stick my phone into the wall and get some pictures, and I was stopped by some archaeologists who told me that I shouldn't take pictures of the site. And that
archaeologists told you?
Yeah, one archaeologist who was working on the site watched me and said, you can't take pictures of this site. And I said, well, why? What if they bulldoze the site to build a project? She said, oh, we'll email you pictures. I just thought that was wrong. What do you mean you'll email me pictures once the site is gone? Yeah. I think the public has a right to see their own history and not to be given a picture or some story about what happened to it. That it be censored by this small elite of archaeologists who are sometimes, I believe, very close to developers. Some archaeologists are actually working with developers. Well, we don't know always what the real story is because there isn't any transparency. But we know that deals can be made between people. You speed up this excavation here, and maybe we'll give you some more equipment to dig over there. We don't know what's going on. We don't know if there's maybe you get an apartment in this building. We don't know. It's all speculation. That's part of the problem. So the Jean Nouvel project is called the Landmark, and it's a hotel and mall complex. And I tried to to get some images of this archaeology that was being discovered in the site, and I was not allowed to do that. So I snuck into a nearby building. I went to the rooftop, and I started to photograph from an aerial perspective this beautiful, massive archaeological site that had all these important features. It had these great big mosaic floors, intricate mosaic designs that people believe could be one of the oldest churches in the Middle East, the 3rd or 4th century basilique in our region. There was also a gate structure. So there's this very important ancient city of Beirut that gave all these contributions to the world, and here possibly was the front door of this city that we couldn't really locate. What a great discovery, possibly. Then we have all of these Roman roads. You know, this site could have been a wonderful attraction, a park, a public space where you could look at all these layers of history in the city. But the plan was to build this real estate project. So I took all these pictures. I got pictures of the mosaics, of the walls, of the roads. I uploaded this to my blog, and you know, within hours it started to go viral. People started to like them and share them. They couldn't believe it because they'd never seen this before. You know, when you're walking along the street, you don't see Beirut because it's so tight and close together, and these walls prevent you from seeing what's going on down there.
You saw a big photo of Jean Nouvel, though, on the wall.
That's right, that's right.
Smiling down at you.
Yeah, they also cover the walls with these artist conceptions of these projects and how they'll change our world. And just the claim of the project was called Landmark. I mean, the claim was so obnoxious that Beirut, one of the oldest cities in the world, needs a landmark from some French architect, modernist structure, when Beirut has so many other landmarks. You know, so calling yourself the landmark was also quite, I think, egotistical, and goes with the whole mindset behind these projects. So my pictures started to go viral, and they were picked up by other bloggers who have bigger audiences than me. Everybody was talking about this site suddenly. And within 2 days, the Minister of Culture canceled the project of Jean Nouvel and said this site will be preserved because of its historical importance. Mm-hmm. So some people thought that the pictures being posted online had something to do with that, all the pressure being put on the ministry that had already destroyed so many other sites seemed to be, for once, responding to pressure. The ministry obviously doesn't agree with that. They say that the ministers had plans to make the site public, but we know that the archaeologists themselves were very concerned, and they said that the minister was really gung-ho about this project just a couple of weeks ago. So it seems that the pressure did make some impact, and we have seen that in many cases now in Lebanon, where, you know, what they could get away with in the 90s, which was basically to take over a whole city, to privatize a whole city, to tear down 700 buildings. They can't really get away with that today because of Facebook and social media, where people like myself can go take pictures very easily with a cell phone camera and upload them and share them onto Facebook pages and groups that have tens of thousands of followers. So that's also what's great now, is that there are all these alternative outlets where you can get your message out there. You know, back in the 90s in Beirut, there were 5 or 6 TV channels, and they were all owned by politicians. So if there was news they didn't want you to hear, you didn't hear it. And if you had a story you wanted to tell, they didn't let you tell it. But now you can tell your own story on your own platform. So a lot of these activist groups in Lebanon today, they have, you know, audiences and reaches of hundreds of thousands of people, so they're reaching more people on Facebook than some of the old school TV channels are reaching. So that erosion of power that's happening, where people are able to challenge projects by publicizing and embarrassing politicians, is really challenging the political structure in Beirut. And I think it's a subtle thing that's happening, but it's growing every year.
So we're walking around, you're showing me all of these building sites, the Jean Nouvel one, you've been talking about all the other starchitects, Renzo,
Rafael, Moneo.
Yeah, and Coolhouse.
So ironic, you've got all these starchitects, you know, you've got almost a dozen Pritzker Prize winners that are active in Beirut today, the Nobel Prize of Architecture, right? Yeah. How does that jive? How do you have that huge divide? So many beautiful, pretty, you know, multi-million-dollar projects being built in a city that can't even take care of basic issues like keep lights on in the streets.
Where lies the responsibility of these starchitects in preserving or insisting that the developers, have 5 years of archaeology before they build their building? They're not doing this. They're just saying yes to these contracts. Where's their responsibility in this story?
Beirut is a big cash cow for the world's most famous architects. They're all doing projects here, and the world's biggest design and engineering firms have all gotten a piece of the pie of the Beirut reconstruction project. And you have to wonder, this is why I say that when we just blame the Lebanese people for their so-called incompetence, well, a lot of really very competent, global firms are also making money off of this city and are part of that. And so I think that they do hold some responsibility. If you sign up for a project that you make millions of dollars off the design, and that's going to destroy, an ancient Phoenician port, which was probably the case in one of the projects that happened in Beirut, where an ancient structure was destroyed to build 3 towers by Rafael Moneo. And where is his accountability in that? Does he just say, "Oh, it's not me. It's just a client," Well, you can't just say it's just a client. You're part of that process. You're designing a future that doesn't include the past. So I think these architects do bear some responsibility. But there's I feel like whitewashing that's going to be going on right now in the coming years in Beirut, where architects like Renzo is a famous Italian architect. He's designing several towers for Beirut. One of them is a bank, great big glass towers. And during building that, excavating for that project, they found a whole city of ruins on their plot. The entire plot was about a 4,000 square meter plot, was wall to wall, covered in ruins. Now they're gone, and the tower is rising. At the same time, Renzo is involved in another project, which is a city history museum. So what better way, right, to make up for destroying a city or pretend that you're making up for it, do PR, damage control, than to create a museum and say, look what I'm doing here. But the museum project that he's designing is also being built on a plot that's full of ruins, wall-to-wall ruins. So how are you going to build a foundation for a big building if you got a whole site full of ruins? Why are we building a museum to showcase history by taking out history to build a museum? Yeah. Removing ruins to showcase ruins doesn't really make sense. Why not just keep the ruins in place and then build a museum in one of the many other plots in the city? So the architects are designing these structures before any excavation ever happens. We don't know what they're finding on these plots. You could find very important ruins, but then you've already designed this huge tower that needs a big foundation, so oh well.
And we paid them already, so we got to build it, yeah.
Yeah, so you have this situation that happens where really the city of Beirut should have been excavated entirely before construction began. But the way that it's being done is that they're leaving the excavations in the hands of the developers. So if you find ruins on your plot, the Lebanese law says, okay, you have to call the antiquities department of the government, and they will send some people to start to investigate that site and do the archaeological excavations. And you have to pay. The developer has to pay for those excavations. And then when the developer decides that, he wants to stop paying for them, the excavations stop. And so the decision must be made at some point whether the ruins discovered will stay or whether they will be reintegrated into the project, which is a very interesting scheme that they've been coming up with these days, or whether the ruins will be just trashed, basically moved, destroyed, not important,
used
and the
as
project will be built.
Used as,
which has happened many times. And the other options are not really that much better when you think about it, because the reintegration, which is the darling option that they love, they think they can do, it's a win-win, right? We could preserve the history and build a tower. So what happens is you get a bit of history saved, not really the whole project, in some parking garage, okay, of a private building. So while in Rome, the Roman chariot racetrack is used today as a festival grounds where people can actually, imagine the wonderful heritage of this space. In Beirut, the Roman chariot racetrack was discovered, but it's now been a real estate plot to build 6 villas. And the architect is saying, oh, we're going to preserve some of the chariot racetrack in the garage of my building. So you'll have a little bit of a stone wall that you can barely see through a window, parked next to some Ferraris and Lamborghinis probably.
Yeah.
And the problem is that those really high-end properties, they're not really keen on having visitors. So it's going to be very hard to even have a peek at that history. But also, what's the meaning of a stone wall underground in a hole versus having an open air space, I mean, a chariot racetrack is not in a basement of a building. It should be open air, to really enjoy, to appreciate, to kind of reimagine what this city must have been like. Yeah. And so the reintegration approach is kind of another whitewashing, I feel, where history is treated as landscape, decorative landscaping. We'll put a few Roman columns here or there in between the private garden of our tower, and God knows who will be allowed in to see it. So another thing they do is they often say things on paper, like we're going to have this public space, it's going to be accessible to the public, but then in reality, when they build it, you've got police on every corner and checkpoints, and you're not even allowed to walk. So in the neighborhood where the chariot racetrack did exist and where the villas will now be built, showcasing supposedly a small portion, you can't even walk on that street today. No pedestrians are allowed to walk in front of that building. Wow. Because when you build these high-end properties, you get high-end clients, millionaires and billionaires who don't want to be bothered by the public. So there's a lot of problems with this idea of reintegration, although they're holding it up now as the holy grail of preservation. And it's worrying because a lot of developers are coming to Beirut and saying, oh, Beirut can be a model for how we develop Syria and Yemen and Iraq and Libya. Beirut as a model for heritage preservation, when it seems to be the opposite of that.
When I was interviewing Habib with my crew for the Life-Size City a few days before this interview, he walked us around the city. It was fun, and it was fascinating. Habib's passion and energy are contagious. We peered over construction hoardings, down at amazing ruins, entire streets with buildings, layer after layer of priceless history. On one site, there was a corner of the ruins covered with tarp. Habib said, oh, that's probably something really important, so they covered it up so we can't see it. We visited the site of the Jean Nouvel landmark development. 2 board guards were watching the entrance. Habib prepped me and the crew. Right, we just walk in like we own the place and I'll talk to the guards. I don't know what he said to them in Arabic, but it sounded like, chill man, no problem, just a foreign film crew, no big deal, it'll take 5 minutes. It worked. We stood there looking down at even more spectacular ruins. Quite simply mind-blowing. But it's not always this easy in Beirut. And it's certainly not always this easy to be Habib.
People don't like you to take pictures of ruins on their construction site because they're afraid of a public outcry. And so I've actually been assaulted. I've been threatened, and I've also been physically attacked inside real estate projects. Recently there was a project called District S or Districts, I don't know even how you pronounce it, a $300 million project by a British design firm that is a series of towers and residential complex and penthouses and rooftop pools and hanging gardens. It all sounds wonderful if you have millions of dollars to afford a place there. But there was also a lot of ruins. It was also being built in the Hellenistic quarter of the city where a lot of Greek ruins were when Beirut was an important Greek city, before it was a Roman city. And I tried to get some shots of it, and I was told to get lost and not take photos, and that there was no history here by the people on site. And I said, well, if there's no history, then what's the harm in letting me have a look? And finally they kind of, after some discussion, they allowed me in to a limited portion of the site where I couldn't see anything. They said, look, there's nothing here, so go home now. And I just turned the corner and I saw a huge pile of ruins and a bulldozer, taking some ruins apart. And I took a picture of that with my phone. And immediately they demanded that I erase the photo. They surrounded me. They locked me in. They said, lock the gates. So I was locked in behind these like 2-meter walls, like 10 meters under the ground in this excavation of a major project. And above us are these containers that contain the offices of the executives. So I'm sure the executives were watching as I was surrounded by 5 site workers and a site manager.
These aren't even police or military, it's just workers.
Private military, basically.
Yeah.
They jumped on top of me, 2 men. They held my hands behind my back and twisted my arms until my arm was about to break, until I dropped my phone. They forced herself into my phone, had me delete all the photos on my phone. They cursed me constantly, cursed my mother, cursed the history of the country. I don't know if we can curse on the show. If I can,
fuck yeah, dude.
They were like, yeah, fuck you and fuck your history. It was very telling, that statement, fuck your history, I thought, because it's our history. I don't know why they're treating it as my history. They think it's made up, that you're making this stuff up. They threatened to frame me as if I was a spy who broke into the property. When they let me in the front door, they want to say I broke in. So you don't know what kind of, I was very vulnerable at that point. Here I am in a hole. It's like a mafia movie.
Yeah, right.
I finally got out. I reported my story to the police. The police discouraged me from pressing charges because they said if I do press charges, then there's no evidence because I was alone. My phone was erased. They could say I was, they could hang some crime on me. They're a very powerful company. They have very powerful lawyers.
Wow.
So the police told me basically, yeah, you're in the danger zone if you want to press charges. You're taking a very risky move. And so I decided I would just file a report, so at least it existed as evidence. I didn't feel like I had enough power. I didn't have an attorney, I didn't have anything to take on these people. So what happened was, is that I thought the case was over. I went on local TV channels and told my story, and I had like 2 minutes of fame, probably 30 seconds actually on some channels. The story was pretty much forgotten. And then a few months later, I was writing about another site, which was this Roman chariot racetrack that's now gone. And I went to the Ministry of Culture to ask them questions and about this different excavation. And about 10 minutes into the questions, the head of excavations at that time in the government asked my name, because he didn't even ask my name when the interview started, because I was doing it for the BBC. And once he knew my name, he lunged at me, he grabbed my recorder, erased everything on my tape that I was recording our interview, called me a liar and a spy and that I wasn't a journalist. I told him you can call my editor at the BBC, and he said that was all lies. He got around to his desk, threatened to call security, called the Minister of Culture, and said, guess who I have here, Minister, looking at me? I have Habib Battah here, the one who caused all those problems for us with the police. And at that moment, I thought, wow, how interesting that I'm reporting an assault on a construction site, and the Lebanese Ministry of Culture finds that offensive. So they find that an attack on a developer or a threat to a developer is a threat to them. And they felt threatened by the Lebanese police being involved in one of their excavations. So I found at that point that the government archaeologists were definitely on the side of the developers and not on the side of the history where they should be. And instead of being an advocate and a fighter for preserving Lebanese history, the ministry often seems to be a rubber stamp on projects and, quote unquote, solutions that, bury the history in these buildings and, or let them, get rid of it to build their towers. So I've faced, threats from high-level officials. I've been physically assaulted in the field. Other times I've been chased. I've been told by one developer at the Renzo piano project, actually, not a developer, but a watchman of a site, that he recorded my license plate and that they're going to send people to my house to beat me up. And I took the threat seriously because the client of Renzo Piano is the owner of a bank whose former bodyguard actually recently killed someone and his bodyguards are notorious for being violent and have had many violent incidences in the press about his bodyguards. So he claims, of course, that, oh, those people don't work for me anymore. But, you know, who doesn't work for anybody anymore in Lebanon? You know, I don't know. And so it's very worrying, you know, and I've taken measures. I don't go by myself anymore to document ruins. I try to keep a safe distance, and I try to go with friends or somebody at least to document if something happens to me. Because when I was locked in that construction site and I had no phone, I couldn't do anything, and I felt, you know, very unsafe. Mm-hmm. And so they do make your life kind of hell sometimes when you're trying to write about history and document the destruction that's happening in Beirut today. And I often feel like surveilled. I feel like there are cameras all over downtown. You know, it is not a very comfortable business. You would think that, you know, documenting history and trying to understand the story of our story would be something that everybody could appreciate. It would be something that the government would support you in doing. But instead we have this shroud of secrecy. We have this violent policing of sites and information. So it's a very, yeah, it can be a very hard job, and a lot of people don't want to do journalism for that reason. But it's funny because people always ask me, what threats do you face as a journalist working in the Middle East? You know, those religious fundamentalists are out to get you, and militias and all this stuff. And actually, the biggest threat I've ever faced is not from militias. You know, I have been censored at some points, but they were polite about it, at least. I've been the most physically aggravated and assaulted not by militias and religious groups, but by private capital, by private corporations who are often really well established in Western countries.
These are developers and their henchmen. Think about it. Property developers sending people to beat up a journalist for wanting to record historical ruins, doing so with the blessing of the Lebanese authorities. Habib isn't some industrial spy trying to expose state or corporate secrets, or uncover illegal detention sites used by the American military, or infiltrating human trafficking networks. He's a journalist trying to photograph archaeological ruins in the interest of preserving history.
Yeah, who would have thought that, you know, the danger zone was not a war zone, but a reconstruction zone?
Well, Habib, so when we were filming here and we were trying to get our permits and we're lining up the whole show, complicated process, you know, for the team, but you know, we do this all over the world. Here, there was a lot of discussion with from the production office about, yeah, don't talk about sensitive issues, don't mention Israel, for obvious reasons in this region, and we have a list of our guests, and we were told, don't put your name on there. Don't put Habib Battah's name on there. And our local producer met the mayor for some reason, or the governor, and he was, what's this show? Well, these tourists, all they want to do is, you know, film all the bullet holes and everything. You know, we want to show them how we're rising again and everything. And
the phoenix rising from the ashes. Oh, that's the cliche that they love.
Oh God! But she was showing the list, and your name wasn't on it, and because we were afraid that if they saw your name, we would just lose all the permits, and, you know, everything would just, you know, tank. So that's the best reason to want to talk to you, of course, man. No, it's...
I think it's too bad. I mean, a lot of people often say, oh, it's a badge of honor if I'm banned or if I'm blacklisted because I'm doing my job. And I don't think that we have to be blacklisted as journalists to do our job, and we shouldn't be. You know, it's a shame that I can't do my work more openly. It's a shame that they don't treat what I do as an asset. You know, on my website, on BeirutReport.com, you can find images of you know, dozens of archaeological sites in Lebanon that don't exist anywhere else. I'm just trying to document the history to give people something that they can reference in the future. So we could just try to create some record, a public record. I'm trying to create a public record of these excavations. They don't like that. You know, they want to be controlling the message. They want to be in control of it. They don't want to be asking critical questions like, why don't we build a park here, you know, so that everybody can enjoy it, so that school kids can enjoy it, so that people, you know, having their lunch can enjoy it, you know, in a city where we have no green space, you know, one of the most concrete jungle of a city that there is. They don't want me to ask those questions. They want me to say, oh, let's celebrate the development. Let's celebrate the next 40, 50, 60 story tower and the latest hotel that no one will be able to afford, you know, and the latest restaurants that are going to be $100 a person. You know, why do I want to celebrate that? They want a PR version Okay, and that's how Dubai is. You know, you can't even be a journalist, I think, in Dubai. I mean, it's a complete, you know, praise the government and praise developers constantly and say everything is doing great. So at least we can still do our work in Lebanon. You know, at least I can still be that critical voice. It's not as bad as places like Dubai where people get arrested for any kind of critique or have been in jail for that. But you also get this kind of effort to tarnish your reputation. And these companies like Solidar have tried to tarnish my reputation. They've tried to paint me as a bad guy, as a liar, and all these things. And yeah, a lot of journalists throughout history, I think, who uncover things that are not pleasant, they get the damage control for the person who's on the receiving end is to paint you as some misfit or you know, person who's got their facts wrong or just some overexcited person. And once a minister told me, "Why don't you get married? That's your problem." You know, I mean, imagine a minister telling you to get married. Yeah. I did get married, and I still have these problems.
Didn't work out.
So it didn't work out. But you know, that's sadly the case, and because of that, a lot of young people aspire to access. They want to be in the club. You know, they don't want to be on the outside. So a lot of young people end up, you know, being promoters of the government and cheerleaders, just to be on the good side. No one wants to be on the bad side. You know, nobody. You know, and it's also costly for you to be on the critical side because you know they might, you know, you might hurt your job prospects in the future, or if you're an activist, employers might not like that. So a lot of people started to be sycophants, you know, and all these influencers now on Instagram, you know, and saying things like, you know, Lebanon's great, Lebanon's beautiful, live, love Beirut, and live, love this, and live, love that. And so we have this whole culture now of praising each other when we're living in a disaster zone, basically, in many ways. I mean, it doesn't have to be that way. You know, there is hope to fix things, but if we keep, you know, trying to find the positive image, you know, and trying to, you know, brown nose and promote people in power, then I think we're only going to get worse. So critical thinking is often interpreted as negative thinking. Criticism is negative. But we know that if we don't learn from our mistakes, then we're going to keep making them. But as it is, we have this whole obsession now with a very PR advertising world of real estate and, you know, artist conceptions of things and just published lies, basically, about, you know, great big proclamations about how wonderful the city is going to be, and in reality, we're still living in this very difficult situation.
When a city bulldozes its history and replaces it with shopping malls and expensive towers, you wonder what tourists are expected to experience in a city like Beirut. The tourism narrative about Beirut can be boiled down to nightlife and beaches. The old moniker for this city, the Paris of the East, still lingers, rather optimistically. But that's about it. In a continuation of this comedy of errors, there was a new tourism addition to the streetscape in Beirut. And there was a wave of publicity orchestrated by the state to try and sell this bizarre new non-place that Beirut risks becoming.
Since I've been here, the launch of the hop-on, hop-off tourist bus happened. It's a thing. I've seen them trudging around town empty.
Empty.
Yeah, seriously. Oh yeah, you said this.
Just like the fancy towers.
Exactly. You said it a couple days ago. Yeah, like you know, we don't have any public buses here really, and now we have a tourist bus. And I also find it ironic you don't have anything to see in Beirut. You know, there's the nightlife. Ooh, yeah, that's great. I've been a part of it, so it is great. But
don't need a bus for that.
You don't need a bus for that, man. But I mean, yeah, like that's just hilarious. I was invited very politely, very innocently, probably. Didn't realize what I was going to be talking about here in Beirut to go to a bloggers event on one of these buses and you know, blog positively about it to my social media crowd. And I went, that's a bit off-brand for me, you know, like we're trying to get rid of these buses in European cities and trying to, you know, limit mass tourism and stuff. So I was going, yeah, thank you, but no thank you. My God, it's just, you know, like who is Beirut for, man, you know?
You know, the PR events in the city are just out of this world. I mean, one thing they're really good at in Lebanon is PR and advertising and putting on a good face, putting lipstick on a pig.
Yeah.
So all of these bloggers these days have become just brand ambassadors, you know, and and event attenders.
Event attenders.
Yeah. So there are always events in Beirut. There's so many PR and advertising companies in Lebanon that are trying to make these destructive projects look good, and so they do these big press conferences at fancy 5-star hotels, and they do a big lunch for everybody.
I was at one of them. Sorry.
Yeah,
I was at an iftar. I was invited, and it was great food. But oh my god.
Yeah, but they get all these people come to our event, have free food, take a few pictures, talk about how great our project is. Don't ask any critical questions. Don't be a negative, bad guy like Habib. Right? I don't get those invites anymore, because they don't want me to come and ask questions about these projects. So it's
Don't you grow up and be a Habib?
Yeah.
Crazy kid.
So, very, very different meaning in Western in the U.S., right? Don't be a Habib for other reasons, but here also I face issues.
Yeah.
And so once I actually wrote about it, I called out, all of these gifts. Some ministers even give gifts to bloggers. One minister gave free phones out, gave free tablets and internet packages for free, T-shirts and memorabilia and raffles even I've seen in some ministries. So, it's bribery. I think it's bribery. I wrote once about it, and I got the ire of all these bloggers in Lebanon who wanted to curse me and yell at me because I criticized these free trips, even giving free trips to other countries and all these freebies that are being handed out, and it's the same with the mainstream press. So the mainstream press and the so-called alternative bloggers are kind of very much similar in attending these press conferences with all these free lunches. And as a journalist, I got invited to a lot of them too, but I didn't get re-invited to many of them after I wrote my articles. So we need to really look at this culture of promoting things that we don't think about what we're promoting. And I think this double-decker bus that you're speaking about, it's a good metaphor for the kind of way things are done in Beirut and the way development is done, which is that we're always trying to please and appease, especially Western tourists and wealthy tourists from the Gulf countries. We want to impress the rich and powerful. We're always trying to impress others and never really serving our own population. Yeah. So while there's no public transport for locals, now we have this fancy London double-decker bus that makes no sense on these tight roads in Beirut.
And so gaudy and ugly, like they are everywhere, really. My God, yeah, it just sticks out like a sore thumb.
The result is they're empty, taking up space, waste of resources. So actually the whole city of downtown Beirut was rebuilt in the image of Western cities. They wanted to imitate capitals like Monte Carlo and Saint-Tropez and Barcelona. That's what they wanted. That was their model. Or London or parts of the US. And they want to attract those kind of people. They want to attract people from those countries. And so what happens when you're building, what's the problem with that? What's the problem with building a city for people that are not your own people? You're always catering to a foreign interest. Whether it's politically or in terms of tourism or business, that's the case in Lebanon. And the result, the problem is that you leave your people last. Your people are the last priority. So we don't get that public transport. We don't get housing, nice housing projects for people who need it in Lebanon. There's a crisis of housing in Lebanon. There's always empty apartments. Why? Because they're building stuff for the wrong people. And that's always been the case in Lebanon. And so when you do, you also leave yourself very vulnerable if you focus totally on foreigners. If something happens in the country, if there's a war, if there's instability, and there always is in Lebanon, then those tourists stop coming. And those tourist attractions become empty. So maybe it's a good lesson from Beirut is to invest in your own people, and to cater to local needs. When you got people who don't have water and electricity and don't have garbage collection and they're living in garbage, you shouldn't be spending a lot of money on attracting foreigners with fancy, marble floors and fancy buses and fancy streetlights and the best hotels in the world and the greatest architects in the world. Why not spend some of that money and invest in your own people first if you want to create a long-term future? Otherwise, you're doing a bunch of white elephant projects that are going to be empty for years and have been empty for years, and a worsening situation. Actually, those real estate developments not only burden the environment and destroy history, but they also raise the rent. They raise the property values. So people are leaving the city. They can't even afford to live in their own city because of all this speculative real estate going on.
Condemnation is vocal, widespread, and universal when groups like the Taliban or ISIL destroy historical artifacts or ruins. It's front-page news. And yet here in Beirut, it happens every single day, and the silence is deafening. I've read about examples from Italy where dodgy developers have excavated a site in the dead of night and shipped the rubble off before anyone knew what was happening, in order to avoid the financial inconvenience of discovering historical ruins. Here in Beirut, this practice is institutionalized, and it's legitimate. What's even worse about Beirut is that we don't know what is being destroyed. Here in one of the oldest cities in the world, developers and starchitects have been given free rein by the ruling class to do whatever they want, without any accountability. One man, not a radical, not even an archaeologist, just a journalist who loves his city, continues to try and document the destruction. Like Habib said, you can't design a future that doesn't include the past. That wraps up another episode of the Coolville Urbanism Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Colville-Andersen. Thanks for listening. And remember, it's your city. Take it back.